Mastermind, Strategist for Hire. Written by Clouds, My Head in the Clouds, Not Coming Down. And read by Eleanor Elizabeth. Chapter 19. Training Camp. The UA traitor rolled his eyes at his classmates' antics as the bus rolled in to a stop. He quickly sent a text sharing his location with Shigaraki. This would show those Class A arseholes. Why did Shoto have to be paired with Bakugo of all people for the test of courage? It wasn't that he hated him, it's just that Bakugo was so loud. They were almost to the halfway point when they saw smoke in the distance.
Hey, Icy Hot! I thought you never used your fire.
I don't, Shoto said. I didn't like that.
Well then who did? Because we're the only ones here with fire quirks, and it sure as hell wasn't me.
Shoto looked around as he prepared to use his ice. Be quiet.
Don't tell me what to do, Icy Hot!
Be quiet. There might be villains. Bakugo scowled.
This is some trick by those Class B losers.
Shoto rolled his eyes. At least he wasn't yelling anymore. Both boys crinkled their noses at the smell like rotten eggs that started wafting through the forest along with a pink mist. What the... Shoto put a hand over his nose as he began to feel lightheaded. The smoke is poisonous. We have to get out of here.
No shit, Sherlock!
Bakugo growled, keeping its own mouth and nose plugged. They ran away from the smoke, coming across a Class B student who had passed out on the trail. Shoto hesitated a moment before putting the boy on his back. Heroes never saved him. But maybe he could save this classmate. They continued on, slower than before due to the extra weight. Because he was no longer covering his face, Shoto got lightheaded much quicker than before, and it was only the practice he had working through the pain of his father's training that kept him going. That was probably why it took him longer than it should have to see the black figure kneeling in the path in front of them.
Who's that?
Bakugo asked, then noticed the severed hand.
Which group was in front of us again?
Tokoyami, I think, Shoto replied softly, trying not to think that the hand might be one of theirs. And Shoji.
So pretty, the figure whispered. No, have to work, but it's so delicious, beautiful flesh.
The man turned around, revealing a wide mouth held open with hooks. Despite the fact the man's eyes were covered, Shoto could feel he was staring straight at them.
I have a job to do.
Aizawa watched in horror as the capture weapon went through the villain. As the flame villain melted into goo, he smirked. I wonder if you can save your students.
Mr. Aizawa, help!
Eraser looked to see Ida running out of the woods, fast as he could, panic on his face.
Show me your blood!
A giant villain barreled after him, muscle fibers bulging. Aizawa's eyes widened as he recognized Muscular and activated his quirk.
What did you do?
Muscular screamed as he deflated, but Aizawa quickly wrapped him in his capture weapon and kneed the villain in the face, knocking him out before blinking. He took in the sight of Muscular's blood-coated fists before turning back to Ida.
Are you all right?
Ida nodded.
The rest of our classmates should be along shortly. I told them to hide. I was the only one who would be able to outrun the villain.
Aizawa nodded. Good work. Head inside. Vlad King is already waiting for you with the other students. I'll be back. He didn't look to see if Ida obeyed as he ran into the woods. If he had heard the flame villain correctly, his students were the targets. He had to save them, or at least get Mandalay to give them permission to fight back. His heart gripped in panic. It was like the USJ all over again. Only this time, the villains wouldn't let the students live because they'd already got what they wanted. The students were what they wanted, which was infinitely worse. The only students he passed as he ran were Ojiro, Mineta, and Koda, who promised to go straight to camp. It wasn't long before he reached the clearing, where the test of courage was supposed to begin. A lizard-looking villain with a sword made out of other swords was bearing down on Mandalay, and Aizawa managed to pull her out of the way with his capture weapon just in time to prevent her from being cut to ribbons. Mandalay, are you all right?
Eraser, have you seen Kota?
Aizawa felt his stomach sink.
No,
I haven't. But I need you to send a message to all the students. Tell them to use their quirks and training, that I'm authorizing them to engage in combat with the villains. Mandalay looked shocked. Are you sure? Aizawa nodded. I'll take the heat. Our students are the targets. They need to be able to defend themselves.
Ah,
a large woman in sunglasses said as she ran at them.
Who squealed?
Wait, the lizard villain cried. That's Eraserhead. He's an underground hero. If Stain was still alive, he would likely judge him as a true hero. Aizawa wasn't quite sure how he felt about that, but the important part was that the villains were too busy arguing to attack.
So what?
So, we must be sure that we are abiding by Stain's principle. The lizard villain was cut off by a kick to the head from Mandalay. At the same time, the other villain was knocked out by Tiger.
Thank you for your help, Eraserhead,
Tiger said, as Mandalay sent the message to the students.
Things were getting kind of rough there.
Where are Pixie Bob and Ragdoll? Tiger looked behind them, and Aizawa paled as he saw Pixie Bob lying on the ground. Ragdoll hasn't checked in. Aizawa took a deep breath. He couldn't worry about that right now. Get her back to camp. I need to go look for the rest of the students. Tiger nodded as Aizawa ran further into the woods. Shoto put up another ice wall to stop the blades, careful to avoid the Class B boy he'd laid on the ground. Don't just rush into this fight, Bakugo.
Whatever, Icy Hot! We've been given permission to fight, so that's what I'm gonna do!
Shoto swore as Moonish dodged his ice wall again and took off to the trees. This guy's quirk is too good at navigating this terrain.
This freak looks like a scrawny little sidekick to me!
He shifted into a battle stance.
Come at me, you bastard!
You can't use your explosions, Bakugo. You could start a forest fire and kill our classmates.
Whatever, Icy Hot! I'm not an idiot!
Todoroki doubted that. Right now, Bakugo is acting just like Endeavor. Take down the villain, show his own strength, don't care who gets hurt in the process. He looked behind him, where the wall of poison gas was now clearly visible. Between Moonfish and the gas, they didn't have anywhere to run. Bakugo ran at Moonfish with an explosion, breaking some of the blade teeth and causing the villain to cry out in pain. Bakugo smirked.
Watch out!
Shoto cried, as Moonfish's blade teeth flashed. But Bakugo couldn't move out of the way in time. He grit his teeth in pain as he was stabbed through the shoulder.
You fucker!
He yelled.
I'll kill you!
Shoto knew he should send an ice wall to protect his classmate, but he could already feel hypothermia setting in. That, combined with the gas, was making it almost impossible to think straight.
Flesh, blood, sweet.
Moonfish stabbed Bakugo again, but this time he was close enough for the student to grab at his face.
Die!
Bakugo screamed and let off a full-force explosion in Moonfish's face. Shoto idly wondered if it was bigger than the one he'd used during his fight with Uraraka at the sports festival. When the smoke cleared, several trees were smoking, and the villain was heavily singed and unconscious.
Weak-ass villain.
Bakugo spit a dollop of blood onto the ground before looking at Shoto, who just barely had the time to wonder about the look of alarm on his face before he felt himself collapse like a telescope. By the time the nauseating sensation had ended, he was surrounded by blue glass walls, and neither Bakugo nor the forest were anywhere to be seen. Uraraka and Sue shifted into battle stances as they stared down the villain in front of them.
What kind of person slashes someone out of nowhere? Sue said. Who do you think you are?
The girl pointed at them with a bloody knife.
I'm Toga! You two are super cute! Uraraka and Asui!
She must know who we are from the sports festival, Uraraka said.
But we don't know anything about her, so we're at a disadvantage,
Sue replied.
There's not enough blood,
Toga pouted.
Normally I'd suck it straight out of the cut to get it flowing, but there is no time. Don't worry, girls. My fun new toy will start pumping as soon as I stick it in you. I'll get my fill in no time.
She looked at them from beneath her lashes.
So, who's first?
Sue threw Uraraka in the air with her tongue the moment Toga started running.
You have to get back to camp. We have permission to defend ourselves, not counterattacked. Ah!
Sue cried out as Toga slashed her tongue.
Sue!
Uraraka yelled. Toga stopped for a moment.
Sue, that's so cute. I think I'll call you that too.
Sue backed away in fear.
Only my friends call me that.
Toga laughed as she pinned Sue against the tree with a needle.
I guess that means we're friends then. You're so cute when you bleed. Get away from her!
Uraraka yelled. Toga turned and came at her with the knife, but Uraraka used her gunhead martial arts and pinned her to the ground.
That was amazing, Ochako! Ochako? You're so cute too!
Toga stabbed her in the leg and let the machine pull the blood out. Uraraka! Aizawa called out her name as he ran into the clearing and activated his quirk.
Aizawa-sensei!
Sue cried in relief.
You have to help her!
Toga jumped away from Uraraka and ran off into the forest.
I don't feel like being killed tonight, she giggled. Toodles!
Uraraka. Aizawa knelt beside her on the ground. You're hurt. She shook her head.
It's not bad.
Good. He nodded, then stood. Make your way back to camp. I've cleared the forest between here and there. You should be fine if you hurry. Uraraka nodded, and the girls were about to leave when they heard a rustling in the trees. All three tensed and prepared to fight. But instead of a villain, it was Bakugo who entered the clearing. He was carrying another student on his back and looked halfway between exploding and crying. Bakugo? Aizawa said. You were paired with Todoroki for the exercise. Where is he? Bakugo shook his head. They took him! Them damn bastards stole Icy Heart! Aizawa's stomach dropped. This was bad. In terms of worst possible scenarios, a kidnapped student was pretty high on the list. Did you see where they took him? Bakugo just shook his head again. It was some asshole in a yellow coat. He collapsed Icy Heart into a fucking marble and then took off into the treetops. I tried to follow them, but... He grimaced. I overused my quirk fighting the one who was trying to kill us, and the bastard was too fast for me to follow on foot. All of a sudden, he screamed and kicked at the base of a tree. I just feel so fucking helpless! Aizawa put a hand on his shoulder. Bakugo, you and the girls get this student back to safety. There's not much else you can do out here anyway if you're suffering from quirk exhaustion. I'll find Todoroki. Bakugo looked like he wanted to argue, but instead he just scoffed. Fine. They were headed east when I lost track of them. Aizawa nodded and ran east. It was a long shot, but if there was any possibility that Todoroki was still here, he had to try and save him. Now we just gotta wait for the others to regroup here. This place is supposed to be hard to find because of the wall of flames and poisonous gas, Dobby sighed. But it looks like the gas is gone. Aizawa hid in the trees, following the flame villain from earlier and a guy named Twice who kept arguing with himself. At one point, he'd seen Aoyama cowering behind some bushes, but Aizawa had just put a finger to his lips and gestured for him to leave. Aizawa wanted nothing more than to take both villains down right now, but he held himself back. Bakugo had said the one who stole Todoroki had a yellow coat, and the forest was large enough that Aizawa would never be able to find him on his own. His only hope was to follow Darby and Twice to the meet-up point and retake Todoroki from the villain who had him. Darby and Twice stopped walking as Toga emerged from the trees. Hey, Crazy, did you get the blood? How many different kinds? Darby asked.
1 person.
Just 1? Twice whined. Good job! Aren't you supposed to get 3?
That's just how it went down. I thought those brats were gonna kill me, and then a pro showed up.
Whatever, it's fine, Twice said. Shouldn't you be full of shame? Both of you shut up, Darby ordered. You're too loud. Welcome, Mr. Compress. You got the kid? Aizawa moved the moment a yellow-coated figure jumped down from the trees, tripping him with the capture weapon and activating his quirk. A ripping sound filled the clearing, and suddenly Mr. Compress's coat was in tatters, and Todoroki was kneeling on the ground looking disoriented. Todoroki! Aizawa ran towards him and saw his eyes widen before a massive wall of blue flame blocked his field of vision. It's been 5 minutes since the signal, a voice declared. Let's go. Aizawa activated his quirk and tried to see anyone, but the flames were too bright, and Darby made sure to stay hidden behind them so Aizawa couldn't see him. When the flames had finally disappeared, Aizawa readied his capture weapon for a fight and looked around for the villains. But all he saw was an empty forest. Chapter 20. To be a hero. Shoto woke up dazed and disoriented. By the time he was aware enough to look around the room, he'd been tied to a chair with quirk-suppressant cuffs. A man with painful-looking scars sat on a chair across from him. But from what Shoto could see, they were the only two in the room. "Hey, Shoto," the man said softly. "It's good to see you." Shoto frowned slightly. He didn't understand why a villain, even one who just kidnapped him, was happy to see him. "Who are you?" The man smiled slightly. "I go by Darby, but I think you can guess that that's not my real name." He leaned forward. "We actually knew each other once, back before I got these scars." "Am I supposed to know who you are?" Darby shrugged. "It's not like you knew a whole lot of people back then. That flaming bastard kept you isolated so that no one could distract you from your training." That made Shoto pause. He'd never heard anyone else talk about Endeavor in that way, with the same intense hatred he himself felt. Against his better judgment, he found himself actually liking the villain that kidnapped him. But how did he know about Shoto's isolation? "My hair was red then, too. Kinda like yours," Darby continued, producing a brilliant blue flame and watching it flicker with brilliant teal eyes. Shoto racked his brain, trying to think of who this guy could be. Red hair, like his left side. Strong flame quirk, like his left side. Teal eyes, like... Shoto's eyes widened. "Toya?" The man smiled. "Hey there, little brother." Aizawa rested his head in his hands as he sat in the interrogation room waiting for Tsukashi. Dozens of students hurt by the gas or other villains. Another in critical condition from a classmate's rampaging quirk. An abducted pro-hero, a kidnapped student, and a dead child. The three measly villains they'd managed to capture were nothing in comparison to the unmitigated horror that the training camp had been. Aizawa looked up when he heard the door open. Tsukashi looked at him sympathetically and set a cup of coffee down in front of him. "How are you holding up?" "I couldn't save him," Aizawa said. "I knew they'd taken him, and I got so close. But at the last minute, I was too weak." He looked at the detective. "What kind of a teacher lets his student be kidnapped?" Tsukashi sighed. "We're dealing with elite villains, the likes of which we haven't seen since before All Might's debut. The blame for this incident is theirs and theirs alone. This was the same group that managed to kill the symbol of peace. So don't blame yourself that you couldn't take them all out. That being said, we do need your statement of the incident. Maybe it can help us find Todoroki in time." "Do you know why he was taken?" Aizawa asked. Tsukashi shook his head. "We were hoping you knew. The best we can come up with is that he was probably abducted to use as leverage against Endeavor. These villains are targeting Hero Society itself, so it would be in line with their goals." Aizawa nodded. "The first I knew of the attack was when Mandalay sent out the message. I left Vlad King with the other students and I left to go fight. As soon as I left the main building, I was confronted by a flame user who implied that they were after the students. I tried to interrogate him, but he dissolved into goo before I could get any information out of him." "Goo?" Tsukashi questioned. "I thought you said he had a fire quirk." "He did," Aizawa sighed. "I think the goo was some kind of cloning quirk belonging to another villain." Tsukashi nodded. "What happened next?" "I took out Muscular as he tried to chase one of my students. Then I went to the forest, sending any student I came across back to camp. I had just saved Uraraka and Asui when Bakugo found me and told me that Todoroki had been kidnapped by a villain in a yellow coat that compressed him into a marble. I searched and found the flame villain I'd fought earlier talking to someone else. I followed them until I saw the villain that had taken Todoroki, then cancelled his quirk, which temporarily freed Todoroki." He grit his teeth. "Then everything went to shit. The fire user used his flames to block my field of vision. I couldn't see to cancel his quirk, and I couldn't see any of the other villains either. By the time the flames disappeared, they were gone, taking Todoroki with them. What did the villains look like? Can you give me any physical characteristics? Aizawa nodded. Let's start with the flame user, Tsukashi said. What did he look like? Tall, black hair, teal eyes. His skin was pale, but his neck and arms, as well as part of his face, were covered in large burn scars that appeared to be stitched together with his normal skin. Tsukashi paused in his note-taking. You said he was held together by stitches? As soon as Aizawa said yes, Tsukashi stood and opened the door. Sanza, bring me the reports on the canvassing operation. What's wrong? Aizawa asked. Nothing, Tsukashi smiled, but we might have a location on the League of Villains. Father told us you died. Darby scoffed and rolled his eyes. Yeah, 'cause after all the shit that guy's done, he'll definitely draw the line at lying. Shoto frowned. It made sense. A little too much sense, actually. But he still wasn't sure that Darby was telling the truth. If you're really my brother, he said suspiciously, then what did we do on weekends when Endeavor would meet up with the Hero Commission? Darby's eyes lit up. Mom would gather us in the front room with all the pillows and blankets in the house. Then she and Fuyumi would make hot chocolate for all of us, and we'd watch a movie. And then we'd make a game of clearing up, so there was no trace of what happened by the time Father came home. He frowned. We stopped that tradition when Endeavor locked Mom away. Shoto stared. None of them had ever told anyone about that tradition, so that Endeavor would never find out. There was only one way he could have known about it, much less spoken about it with so much happiness, unless he was really Toya. I also remember that Mom would ice her bruises and burns after Endeavor's training, he spit out bitterly. After she was gone, Fuyumi took over the job. Darby met Shoto's eyes. They did the same thing for me when I was subjected to that bastard's training before you got your quirk. You went through it too, Shoto breathed out. Darby nodded. It was hell. He'd make me work past my body's limits, producing fire for hours even though it hurt. He'd kick me when I was down, then blame me for being too weak when I couldn't get up again. He'd constantly remind me that I wasn't good enough, even though I was the best shot he had at beating All Might at the time. He scowled. And when you finally got your quirk, he tossed me aside as just another failure, forgetting all about the abuse he'd put me in favor of abusing you. I'm sorry, Shoto said. I'm sorry he forgot about you. Darby shrugged. It wasn't your fault. I'm sorry you got the perfect quirk and had to go through that hell disguised as training longer than I ever did. He chuckled. Even back when I was living at home, I'd fantasized about what I'd do to the bastard if I ever got the chance. How I'd kill him when I got strong enough, even when he was pounding me into the floor. I hated him even then. He looked at Shoto. You hate him too, don't you? Shoto swallowed, but nodded. Absently, he knew that as Endeavor's masterpiece, he shouldn't be bonding with a villain. But Darby was his brother who understood. His brother who had the same burning hatred he did for their father. Even Natsuo and Fuyumi couldn't understand, not in the same way. That's why you don't use your fire, isn't it? Darby asked. Because you hate him? Shoto nodded. It's his quirk. I don't need his power. Just like I don't need him. Darby shook his head. There's a better option here. Shoto tilted his head in silent question, and Darby continued. Endeavor gave you that fire so you'd become a hero. So what if you use that fire for something dear old Dad would hate? Shoto started, remembering Midoriya's words back at the sports festival. You could always use it to do the things your father would hate. How would you like to use your fire to show Dad how wrong he was? How would you like to use it to show him how much you hate him? Shoto thought for a moment. He was supposed to be a hero. That's what he'd been raised to do. But the idea of showing his father how much he'd hurt him was tempting. Father was the one that was always pushing Shoto to become a hero. But had he ever really wanted that? Maybe he had once, back when he was a little kid, back before his mother had been forced away from him. But that small desire had been burned and kicked out of Shoto by a decade of abuse. The only reason he was even at UA was because of what his father wanted. But what did Shoto want? He clenched his fists as the hate burning in his heart grew even hotter. He wanted to show the world what kind of person Endeavor really was, and hurt him like he'd hurt Shoto. He wanted to hurt everyone who thought that heroes were perfect and would always save the day. He wanted to prove to them that heroes weren't gods. He wanted to hurt all the heroes who must have known what was going on, but who never once came to save him. He looked at his brother with fire in his eyes. "So, Shoto," Darby asked, "how would you like to be a villain?" Chapter 21. All for One.
"Okay, I hate to be the one to say it, but I'm just gonna come right out and ask," Yamada said. "Is there a possibility that Todoroki was taken because the League thought he had one for all?"
Nezu shook his head.
"They shouldn't have. That's why we went on with the sports festival like we did, despite All Might's death. All the students' quirks were on display, and none of them were similar to All Might's."
"That being said," Tsukashi said, "we are fairly confident that All for One is behind the League of Villains. The existence of the Nomus confirms that much." "So what are we supposed to do?" Midnight asked. "We can't just leave him alone, not if he's going to go after our students."
"Do we even have a choice?" Snipe asked. "If All for One is really as strong as All Might was at his prime, then how are we supposed to counter that?"
"If his quirk is what makes him strong," Aizawa said darkly, "then we'll just have to take it away." The teachers looked at each other and nodded. They would take down this villain, no matter how strong he was. They owed it to Todoroki. Shoto sat and bound at the bar, watching with a mixture of amusement and horror as Darby tried to hit an increasingly enraged Shigaraki with peanuts. Toga was sitting beside him, cheering Darby on, as one of Twice's personalities did the same, and the other pleaded for him to stop annoying Shigaraki for all of their sakes. Kurogiri simply shook his head fondly and continued cleaning glasses. Already there was more love and camaraderie in this group than Shoto had ever felt at home, and he wasn't quite sure how to deal with that.
"So, Todoroki, I see you made the right decision."
Shoto looked up in shock to see a smiling Midoriya sitting in the window. "Midoriya, what are you doing here?" Toga almost knocked him over as she ran past him and threw her arms around Midoriya, who hugged her back without hesitation.
Mine-chan, you're back!"
"Mastermind," Kurogiri said. "It is a pleasure, as always. May I get you a drink?" Shoto's eyes widened. Midoriya was Mastermind. He looked over to see Midoriya shaking his head. "I'm afraid I'm here on business this time, not pleasure."
"Then get to the point,"
Shigaraki grumbled. Midoriya had finally untangled himself from Toga's arms, and he sighed. "I just thought you might like to know that the villains and police are gathering outside. It looks like they're planning a raid to come rescue Todoroki." He looked at Shoto, giving him a knowing smile. "Too bad they're a little too late for that, huh?" Shigaraki scratched his neck.
"Annoying heroes! How did they find us? Cheaters!"
"Now, Tomura." Shoto flinched as an unfamiliar voice came from the television. "It does not matter how they knew where to find you. All that matters is that now that Mastermind was kind enough to tell us of their plans, how long do you think we'll have before they strike?" Midoriya shrugged. "An hour at the most. If I were them, I'd likely use the planned press conference as a cover." "Might I suggest retreating?" Kurogiri said calmly. "We have other properties that heroes will not have discovered, and Mastermind has given us more than enough time to clear out this location." Shigaraki stopped scratching.
"I guess you're right, Kurogiri. Come on, guys, grab your stuff. Let's go."
Kurogiri was already busy warping away the vast stores of alcohol as many of the others left to go pack. Shoto himself didn't have anything to do, seeing as they didn't bother to grab any of his things when they kidnapped him. He turned his attention to Midoriya, who was wearing what he now recognized as Mastermind's villain costume, but with the hood and mask down. Are you a member of the League? Midoriya laughed and shook his head.
No, I found I work best if I don't tie myself down to any one group. But I've done a few jobs for the League now, and I like working with you guys. Shoto started when Midoriya referred to him as part of the League. When he'd agreed to become a villain with his brother, joining the League hadn't really been on his mind. But he supposed that was what he'd done, wasn't it? It was weird being referred to as part of a group. Like he'd finally found a place to belong. He shook his head.
But you showed up in person for the USJ attack. Why go that far if you weren't a member?
Midoriya's face soured. Killing All Might was personal. Shoto waited for him to continue, but it appeared that he'd said all he was going to say on that subject, so Shoto asked another question.
Then why are you helping us now? From what the news has said about Mastermind, you mostly wait for people to hire you, but you don't care what they get up to when they aren't consulting with you.
Midoriya smiled softly. I see a lot of myself in you, Todoroki. I was abused for years by the person who was supposed to be my hero, while the people who were supposed to protect me turned a blind eye. No one ever saved me. Not because they couldn't, but because no one ever wanted to. Ever since I turned to villainy, I've been happier than I ever was before, and I want the same thing for you. I just couldn't let you go back to living in that hell, not when I had the power to get you out. Shoto found himself blushing. No one had ever cared about his happiness before, certainly not his father. And yet, here Midoriya was, acting like Shoto's happiness was important enough to work for. Even back at the sports festival, before Shoto even considered becoming a villain, Midoriya was there, letting him know that he was more than his father's abuse. Todoroki, are you okay? Midoriya was looking at him with concern. Shoto, he replied, before he could help himself, and he blushed a little more. I don't want to go by my father's name anymore. Izuku smiled and nodded his head in understanding, blushing a little himself. All right, Shoto. You can call me Izuku if you want. Aizawa crouched on a rooftop, halfway between two raid locations. Flag King and Principal Nezu had just started the press conference, which meant that it was almost go time. Aizawa was just grateful that his quirk was a part of the plan, so he didn't have to deal with the vultures. He couldn't imagine the disaster it would have been if the villains had taken another student, say Bakugo. Aizawa shuddered. If they'd taken Bakugo, the school would have been blamed for broadcasting his violent behaviour, and UA would be in a lot of trouble. As it was, the blame was rested solely on the villains, for now, but a press conference was still deemed necessary for this big of an incident. A voice came over his earpiece. The Nomu factory has been secured. Thank you, best genist, Tsukashi's voice said. You and your team keep an eye out. The villains might try and recover them. Aizawa sighed. One down, one to go. If he had to guess where All for One would show his face, he would bet on the bar, since that's where they were keeping Todoroki and where most of the villains were located. That meant the most difficult part of the mission was still to come. Pizza delivery, Edshot called out, then nodded to Gang Orca, who used a sonic attack to knock down the wall. Kamui Woods ran in after him, ready for his first major battle since he'd been injured by Mastermind months ago. All clear. What? Edshot unlocked the door and walked in. Where are they? The heroes looked around the room for a moment, before seeing a yellow post-it note stuck to the counter. They crowded closer to read it. Just missed us. Winky face. We have a problem. Aizawa frowned at Edshot's voice. They're not here. What do you mean they're not there? Endeavor growled. He'd been sent to the Nomu factory, since his fire was one of the few things that could harm a Nomu, and they were concerned this whole thing might really be an elaborate trap for the number one hero. I mean, the only sign that anyone was ever here is a post-it note saying, just missed us, with a winky face. They obviously knew we were coming. Aizawa ignored Endeavor's frustrated rant. If the villains weren't at the bar, where were they? And how would they get Todoroki back? Suddenly, the radio went silent, and there was an explosion in the distance.
"Genist, come in! What the hell is going on over there?"
Aizawa held his breath, but there wasn't an answer.
"Aizawa, go help them!"
Aizawa ran as fast as he could to the Nomi factory and almost jumped off a roof before he realized the building that was supposed to be there wasn't anymore.
"I don't need your quirk," a voice was saying. "It wouldn't pair well with Tomura's disposition."
A grunt, and Aizawa looked down to see Best Jeanist's eyes glazed over, and a man in a black mask punched a hole through his gut. Endeavor was just starting to stand back up with rage in his eyes, while Tiger had been knocked unconscious by the blow.
"Sakashi,"
Aizawa whispered into his radio.
"I have eyes on All for One." "My apologies, heroes," All for One said. "But I simply cannot allow you to take these Nomu. They're essential to young Tomura's success." "Surrender, villain!" Endeavor declared. "You have nowhere to run."
All for One chuckled.
"If I wanted to run, you wouldn't be able to stop me."
Endeavor shot a wave of fire at him, but All for One simply stepped aside and let the flames pass by him harmlessly. Endeavor growled.
"Flash fire fist! Jet burn!"
He used both hands to create a massive wave of flames.
"Air cannon plus spring-like limbs,"
All for One said calmly, as a massive wave of wind blew the flames off course, sending them flying towards a bank of apartments that were engulfed within moments. Screams sounded from the apartments, and Aizawa swore.
"Tsukashi, get Backdraft or someone over here. I can't intervene yet, not if we want to capture this bastard."
"I already called him," Tsukashi said. "Wait for backup and stick to the plan." All for One and Endeavor kept fighting, neither landing a hit on the other, but increasing collateral damage with every attack.
"Flame tornado!"
Endeavor yelled, jumping into the air and using his flames to propel himself forward as he spun towards the villain.
"Air cannon plus spring-like limbs, kinetic booster ×4, strength enhancer ×3.
He seemed almost bored, as his attack flung Endeavor straight through the nearby buildings. Already weakened from the fire, they started collapsing almost immediately. It was only by using his fire to melt through the rock that Endeavor managed to survive. He wasn't going to last much longer if this kept up.
"Is everyone in position?"
Aizawa whispered impatiently, and almost sighed with relief when a chorus of affirmatives came over the radio. Aizawa took off his goggles and set them on the roof. Power Loader had made him a special version of his hero costume just for this fight. It looked mostly like his standard one, except this one was made to withstand the heat of Endeavor's flames, and had a hood and mask that he pulled up to protect his hair and face. Finally, he put on the new goggles, still painted gold, but this time fully enclosed with a mirror effect. A temperature regulator wrapped around his chest, and he turned it on, shivering at the artificial cold. After he finished adjusting his new suit, Aizawa took a deep breath and jumped off the building, landing in a roll. All for One and Endeavor were still exchanging blows as Aizawa crept closer. Despite the fact that he was in full view, All for One didn't seem to notice him, which was when Aizawa took note that his mask didn't have any eye holes. He must be using some sort of infrared heat vision to see, which made Aizawa almost invisible in the flames. All the better. The fight shifted, and Endeavor caught sight of him, nodding silently and retreating a few steps to put some distance between himself and All for One. Aizawa ran to stand between the two fighters, so that he could see All for One, but not Endeavor, and activated his quirk.
"Now! Prominence burn!"
A massive beam of fire shot past him, turning quickly from orange to blue, and Aizawa started sweating as the temperature regulator in his suit struggled to keep up. He held his quirk for as long as he could, but he had to blink eventually.
"Midnight!"
he yelled above the noise of the flames, and Endeavor stopped his attack. Midnight quickly ran out from behind a building and cranked her quirk up to full force, completely shrouding the area in purple mist. Aizawa heard Endeavor fall to the ground behind him, and saw All for One collapse in front of him, heavily burned, but not dead. As the gas took hold and the police surrounded the area, Aizawa finally closed his eyes. Chapter 22. Threat.
So, let me get this straight, Izuku said tersely. You want me to join your little Yakuza, rather than having me in a consulting role as was the agreement when I showed up here?
Overhaul simply looked unimpressed.
You've done a few impressive things in your short career, he said, scratching at his wrist. But with the recent defeat of All for One, villains are looking for a leader to fill the vacuum of power. Your actions strike fear into people's hearts, but you have no vision, no plan for society beyond making a quick buck. I have a plan, and a vision of the world without the infection of quirks. A vision you no doubt agree with, being quirkless yourself, if the rumors are true.
He clenched his fist.
Put yourself under me, and I'll show you how well I can use you. I think you deliberately misunderstand me, Overhaul. Izuku grit his teeth. I have no intention to join any group, nor do I particularly care what happens to society, as you put it. I'm not even trying to be the leader of the underground. I am more than happy to let you or Shigaraki or whoever the hell else has a desire for the throne to take it. What I value is having the freedom and power to do what I want when I want to. And that sometimes means having to work with rival groups, so joining any organization would be counterproductive to my goals.
He leaned forward.
And as for the issue of quirks, don't presume that you know what I want. Quirks are tools, nothing more, nothing less. I don't hate them or see them as an infection that needs to be eradicated, unlike you. What I do hate, though, are people who act like the world belongs to them simply because they have a powerful quirk. In other words, Overhaul, I hate people like you.
Izuku stood up and walked towards the door, fingering his throwing knives and getting out of the range of Overhaul's quirk.
So, no, I will not be joining your Yakuza, and this meeting is over.
Chronostasis tried to follow Mastermind as he left without being dismissed, but Overhaul simply held up a hand.
Don't worry, Chrono. I have ways to convince him.
He glared at the door where Mastermind had disappeared.
Find out everything you can about Mastermind. He will be my disciple soon enough.
Inko walked home carrying a bag of groceries in each hand. Normally she wouldn't go to the store so late, but they were out of milk, and she'd had a late shift at work, so here she was, walking back to the apartment an hour after dark. Hopefully Izuku would be home by the time she got there. He had been spending a lot more time out with his friends lately, which made her really happy, even though she hadn't met any of them yet. Lately he'd even been texting a boy named Shoto, almost constantly, something Inko had never seen him do before, not even with Katsuki. Maybe she should ask what Shoto's favourite food was, and have Izuku invite him over to dinner? Maybe Himiko or Tomura would even join them. It would be nice to finally have faces to put to the names. All she knew about them so far was that Shoto was sweet, Himiko was high energy, and Tomura was a little too into video games. Maybe she should ask Izuku when their birthdays were? They could shop for the perfect gifts together, maybe even make a day of it. It would be the perfect excuse to hang out with her son, now that he was finally thriving, and out of that weird depression that had taken hold of him for a few months almost a year ago. Inko couldn't help but be proud of her son, and how he was finally living his best life, because he gave up on that impossible dream. She had always done her best to discourage him from being a hero, because it just wasn't a realistic dream for someone quirkless, and she didn't want him to be disappointed. Above all, Inko just wanted Izuku to be safe, and that included not trying to face down villains who were so much more powerful than he could ever hope to be. Inko didn't know what she would do if Izuku ever got hurt. After Hisashi's work transferred him shortly after Izuku's 4th birthday and quirk diagnosis, her baby was all she had. It was important that he stayed safe. She knew that it had hurt him when he finally came to terms with the fact that his dream was impossible. But he got past it, and now look, Izuku had friends now, and he was so much happier than he had ever been while he was trying to be a hero. and now that Izuku was finally happy, that meant Inko could be too. Suddenly, Inko felt a rough hand on her collar, and she cried out as she was yanked backwards into an alley. She tried to run, but was suddenly hit by a wave of dizziness and nausea, and it was all she could do to stay on her feet.
"Give me your money!"
"Okay!" she cried, dropping her groceries to the ground and taking out her wallet. What with both the darkness and the dizziness, she couldn't see her attackers clearly, but it looked like they all had bird mutation-type quirks. No wonder they turned to mugging. It had always been difficult for obvious mutation types to find good jobs.
"All right," a bored-sounding voice said. "Let's finish this up."
Inko flinched back as a hand reached for her, but the hand grabbed her anyway, and suddenly she was engulfed in red-hot pain. Inko didn't know how long she was in pain, but then it was over. She briefly realized she collapsed at some point, and she could hear her attackers' footsteps retreating. Once they were gone and she'd retreated a little, she felt around for her purse and grabbed her cell phone, which was miraculously still there.
"Hello? Police?" "Mum!"
Izuku cried out as he saw his mum sitting in the back of an ambulance talking to a police officer as a paramedic looked at her.
"Mum, what happened?"
"I'm fine, Izuku," Inko said.
"The paramedics say I'm better than normal. Even my old root canal somehow fixed itself up."
Izuku paused. "What happened?" he said lowly.
"Midoriya, I'm Officer Sansa. Your mother appears to have been mugged," an officer with a cat head said. "Although we're not sure what their motivations were. All her cards and cash were still in her wallet. We think they might simply enjoy causing pain, since one of the quirks seemed to be causing an immense amount of pain without any permanent damage." Izuku was practically vibrating with rage at this point. "What did they do to you, Mom?" Inko shook her head.
"One of them just touched me and everything kind of exploded in pain for a minute or two, until everything was fine again and they left. I'm fine, Izuku."
Izuku did not think that this situation was fine by any stretch of the imagination. He didn't care how long it took, he thought, as he started to run his hands through his mother's hair to comfort her. He would track down the thugs that hurt her and make them pay. "Midoriya-san," Officer Sansa asked, "can you give us any physical descriptions of your attackers?" Izuku perked up as Inko shook her head.
"It was dark, and one of them had a quirk that made me really dizzy. The only thing I noticed was that they all had bird mutation quirks, so I assume they're related."
Izuku stilled. Bird mutation types, or just bird masks? A dizziness quirk, or a drunkenness quirk? A quirk that caused immense pain, or a quirk that was able to disassemble and reassemble matter to the point that even a decades-old root canal was suddenly gone to the point that it seemed that it had never been there? Izuku wrapped his arms around his mum as she finally broke down and started to cry. This wasn't a mugging. This was a threat. "Be careful. I know what's important to you, and I'm not afraid to kill to get what I want." Izuku's eyes took on an intimidating fire. Overhaul had just made a huge mistake. Chapter 23. Overhaul. Content warning. This fic is rated teen and up for graphic depictions of violence, and this chapter is going to get a little bit bloody. It had been a month since Inko's mugging, as the police had called it, and Izuku was finally ready. The day after his mum was attacked, Izuku had pretended to go back to Overhaul with his tail between his legs, but he was really playing the long game, making sure his mother was safe until he was ready to destroy the Yakuza himself. Being part of the Yakuza was interesting, for lack of a better word. For all that Overhaul bragged about using him to his fullest potential, Izuku had basically been doing glorified busy work every time he was at the compound. He was seen as a new member, so he was at the bottom of the pecking order, a fact that irritated him to no end. He wasn't even allowed to be involved in the real work of the Yakuza. All he knew was Overhaul's glorified rhetoric about a quirkless world. It was getting really annoying. Shoto had offered to come along and help him get his revenge, but Izuku had respectfully declined. Overhaul had threatened his mother, the only person who had even given a damn about him before he became a villain. So, leaving the job to anyone else would have been supremely unsatisfying.
even if that someone was a close friend like Shoto. Izuku pulled his mask up over his mouth and jumped down to street level, staying in the shadows as he sneaked up on the guards. A few slit throats and a stolen keycard later, he was wandering the silent halls of the upper compound. He knew there were only a few guards on this level, with most of the Yakuza living and working in the labyrinth below, so it didn't take Izuku long to track down the dozen or so low-ranking members on duty that night and take them out. A simple throwing knife through the eye or a slit throat was a quick enough death for most of them. Izuku wasn't about to waste time and energy playing when any of them could easily raise the alarm. Besides, these small fry were nothing more than collateral damage in his complete annihilation of Overhaul, and an effective message to anyone else who might get it into their heads that it was a good idea to go after his mother. Izuku had bigger plans for the night. It took him a few minutes to find the secret entrance to the rest of the compound, since he'd never been allowed to find it unaccompanied, but it only slowed him down a little. He kept to the blind spots in the halls, silently killing everyone he came across until he found the barracks. He almost felt bad as he viciously slashed each one of the sleeping men's throats, but the feeling didn't last long. Yeah, none of them had made the call to attack his mother, but they had all made it known in the past month exactly how they felt about weak, quirkless people like him. And they were following an idiotic psychopath, so there was that. Izuku followed his same pattern as he gradually cleared the compound, picking the lock on every door and killing everyone inside. He hadn't been surprised to find a variety of labs tucked away, but was surprised at how little raw material they had stored. Shouldn't there be a lot more chemicals involved in the production of quirk-erasing drugs? He pocketed a few vials of the quirk eraser that he found in the lab and used them to coat some of his knives before heading towards Overhaul's room. The only other room, aside from his, was a door that locked from the outside. Izuku didn't know what was in that room, but whatever it was would still be there after he killed Overhaul and his inner circle. The Expendables all stood up when he entered the small guard room that he had to go through to get to Overhaul, and he smiled at their shocked expressions as they took in his blood-soaked costume. "Mastermind," Chronostasis said, carefully keeping his voice even. "You're not supposed to be here." "You're right," Izuku smiled. "I'm not." In a flash, Izuku had thrown two of the knives dipped in the quirk eraser at Satsuno and Sasaki, since their troublesome quirks could affect him directly. He smirked when Setsuno's eyes widened and he tried to steal the knife that Izuku just grabbed, only to be left grasping air. "What?" he taunted. "Having trouble with your quirk?" Rapper pounded his chest. "I'm not, and even if I was, I wouldn't need a quirk to kill the likes of you. Just be sure to give me a good fight first." Izuku simply dodged out of the way of Rapper's quirked punch and attacked the other members. He first ran towards Tengai, who threw up a barrier to block him, but neglected to remember that Rapper was running after him at full speed. Izuku smirked as he dodged at the last minute, subjecting Tengai's barrier to the full force of Rapper's quirk, which broke through it almost immediately, allowing Izuku to step right up behind Tengai and slit his throat. Rapper gave a scream of rage and ran at Izuku again, but he was already on the move, this time headed towards Hojo, who had already covered his body in crystals. Just like before, Izuku waited until the last minute before dodging and letting Rapper tear through the opponent's defenses before finishing him off. "Enough! He's using you to hurt your own men!" Chronostasis yelled, and extended the hour hand of his hair to hit Rapper, immobilizing him. Izuku didn't waste the opportunity, and Rapper was dead before anyone had the chance to blink. Tabe immediately ran at him, mouth open wide, but Izuku simply shoved a knife down his throat before he had the chance to bite down. 4 down, 4 to go. 5 if Izuku was counting Chronostasis. Katsukami ran to try and touch Izuku and sap his energy, but Izuku didn't let him get that close, dodging while slashing one of his longer knives and following it up with a throwing knife to the back of the head. "Who will you be going for next?" Nomoto asked. "It doesn't matter much at this point," Izuku answered honestly. He didn't have much of a choice after all. "Your quirk doesn't help you in combat, and both Setsuno and Sasaki are functionally quirkless right now. I'll beat you all easily." All three rushed him at once, trying to overwhelm him with numbers, but Izuku had analysed all of their fighting styles extensively over the last month, and had much more experience fighting quirkless than they did. Chronostasis also couldn't hit him without risk of hitting his other teammates, a mistake he wasn't about to make again. So the fight didn't last long. When they were all dead or bleeding out, Izuku finally turned to Chronostasis, who was staring at him in shock. Izuku smiled and lazily tossed a knife at him, forcing him to dodge. "That's a pretty cool quack you've got there, Chrono." He tossed another knife. "Too bad it's got such a big weakness." Izuku forced Chronostasis to keep moving, which prevented him from using his quirk, all while Izuku gradually moved closer. After a few minutes, Chronostasis was panting and finally stood still, apparently deciding that the benefits of using his quirk outweighed the potential danger. It was the wrong decision. Izuku slashed his throat before Chronostasis even had the chance to extend his hair. Izuku straightened as he heard the door to Overhaul's room open behind him. "What is the meaning of this?" Overhaul looked over his dead underlings, crinkling his nose in disgust. "The meaning of this," Izuku said, carefully coating a knife in the stolen quirk eraser behind his back, "is that you threatened the wrong person." Overhaul sighed and removed his gloves. "It'll be a shame to have to kill someone so uncontaminated. But, oh well." He ran at Izuku, who watched him get closer without dodging. At the last moment, he ducked underneath Overhaul's outstretched arm and sunk the knife into his gut. Overhaul let out a grunt, but simply slapped Izuku on the back. Nothing happened. "Nice quirk eraser you've developed, isn't it?" Izuku taunted, as Overhaul's eyes widened. "Too bad you haven't practiced being perfect? Wasn't that the word you used to describe people like me?" Unlike his men's, Overhaul's death was not quick. Izuku took pleasure in slowly taking the man apart, like he'd taken apart his mother. When he was finally done, Izuku gathered up all the knives he used during the fight and headed down the hall to the mysterious locked room. Whatever was inside must have been important if it was so close to Overhaul's own residence, and maybe prone to escape if it had to be locked inside the room. After picking the lock, Izuku quickly grabbed a knife and shifted into a battle stance. It paid to be prepared for anything. Izuku was not prepared. He didn't know what he was expecting, but it definitely wasn't a little girl huddled in a bed staring at him with wide red eyes. Izuku was suddenly very aware of the fact that he was covered in blood and holding a knife. The little girl seemed very aware of that as well, if the way her wide eyes were tracking his every movement was any indication. Izuku hurriedly put his knife away, putting his hands out in front of him in a belated attempt to be non-threatening. "Hello there. I'm not going to hurt you." The girl didn't look like she believed him, but she also didn't start screaming, so Izuku figured that that was as good as he was going to get. "My name is Mastermind. What's your name?" The girl fiddled with her hands in her lap, and now that he'd gotten over the shock of seeing the little girl locked in the middle of a Yakuza compound, he noticed that her arms and legs were covered in dirty bandages, just barely covered in most places by her too thin nightgown. "Eri?" Her voice was small and hesitant, like Izuku's had been when talking to the teachers in middle school, and he felt his heart break. What was she doing here? "Eri, is it okay if I sit next to you?" Eri hesitated but nodded, allowing Izuku to sit on the bed beside her. He pointedly ignored the fact that he was staining the sheets red as he looked her in the eyes. "What are you doing here, Eri?" Eri trembled for a solid minute before replying. "I have to help Overhaul. I'm sick." Izuku tried to ignore his anger. He didn't need Eri getting any more scared than she already was. "What do you mean, Eri? What did you have to help Overhaul with?" She tugged at the bandages on her arms, and Izuku's eyes widened at the deep lacerations underneath. "My sickness makes other people not sick anymore, so Overhaul takes the sickness from my blood so that he can put it into other people so that they're not sick." Izuku's eyes widened. The quirk eraser he'd stolen was made from Eri's blood? Izuku wanted to march back to Overhaul's body and somehow bring him back to life so that he could torture him to death all over again. What kind of monster tortures a little girl just to get hands on her quirk? Izuku looked at her softly. "You don't have to help Overhaul anymore, okay, Eri? Overhaul's gone." Eri looked at Izuku up and down, wide eyes taking in the blood, and her lips started to tremble. Izuku panicked, worried he'd said the exact wrong thing. What if Overhaul had somehow convinced Eri that he loved her, and he just killed the one person she thought meant the world to her? Why was he so stupid? Suddenly, Eri's arms wrapped around his waist and she started sobbing.
"Thank you,"
she sniffed quietly, either not noticing or not caring that she was getting blood all over her hair and nightgown. Izuku awkwardly patted her on the back as he waited for the tears to pass. This poor girl had been through too much already. That brought him to the question of what he was going to do with her. He couldn't just bring her home. His mother and the cops would ask where he'd gotten her, and it could reveal his identity all too quickly if they linked Eri back to Overhaul. Even if that wasn't an issue, Izuku wasn't ready for the responsibility that would come with raising a traumatized child. He wasn't about to entrust her to another villain group either. They would just use her for her quirk, the way Overhaul had. Izuku sighed. There was only one option left. He gently grabbed Eri's shoulders and pushed her back so that he could look into her eyes. "Hey, Eri, are you ready to leave?" Eri nodded eagerly, eyes bright with hope, and Izuku knew that if she still knew how to, she'd probably be smiling. Izuku lifted her up so that she was clinging to his back before making his way outside. He wished he'd left a path cleared of bloodshed, but he hadn't exactly been planning on carrying a 5-year-old on the way out. If anything, he at least hoped Eri realized that the bodies they passed meant that no one would be coming after her. It was probably a sick sort of comfort, but there was a chance it might make this whole ordeal less traumatizing. The sky was just starting to get brighter as it got closer to sunrise, and they had an excellent view as they ran across the rooftops towards Night Eye's agency. Izuku had figured out that Night Eye was investigating Overhaul while he was gathering his own info on him. The hero didn't know about Eri, as far as he knew, but despite his serious appearance, he had a good heart. Hopefully he'd be able to help Eri recover and find a good home that would protect her from anyone who wanted to use her. When they reached the roof of the agency, Izuku slowly crouched down and pulled Eri off his back so that she was facing him. He cringed at how she looked like she'd just come off the set of a horror movie, but sighed when he realized that wasn't far from the truth. At least none of the blood was hers. "The man who works here is a hero who is investigating Overhaul." Izuku looked her in the eyes. "He's going to take good care of you and make sure no one hurts you ever again, okay?" Eri nodded, but hesitated a moment, fiddling with the hem of her blood-stained nightgown.
"Mastermind-sama?"
Eri's quiet voice trembled slightly.
"Why did you save me?"
Izuku hesitated for a moment, before deciding that Eri had already been fed far too many lies in her short life. "To be honest, I wasn't trying to save you. Overhaul threatened someone that I care about, and I couldn't let that stand. But I'm glad I was able to save you, even if it isn't why I originally killed Overhaul. I know what it's like to have people hurt you just because they can, and it's something I wouldn't ever wish on anyone." Eri stared up at him with wide eyes.
"You were hurt too?"
Izuku nodded, and her voice dropped to a whisper.
"But you're so strong."
"Even strong people get hurt sometimes, and sometimes the people who hurt them try to make them feel weak. That's what happened to you and me." Izuku smiled and ruffled her hair. "We're strong people, and it's not our fault that others chose to hurt us." Eri's eyes lit up.
"I'm strong?"
she asked in wonder. Izuku laughed. "The strongest." He stood up. "I'm happy I was able to meet you, Eri. Wait a few minutes after I'm gone, then knock on the door and tell them what happened. The heroes here will take good care of you." Eri looked up at him for a long moment before flinging herself to hug his legs.
"Thank you so much, Mastermind-sama. Thank you."
Izuku smiled and ruffled her hair again. "No problem, Eri. Be safe." Eri nodded and let go, waving to him as he got a running start and jumped onto the next roof. He only ran a few roofs away before stopping and crouching down. Eri was still standing on the roof, looking small against the skyline. She waited another 2 minutes before walking over to the door that he had shown her. She hesitated a long moment before pounding hard with both fists. Bubble Girl thought it was much too early to be dealing with anything, especially teenage pranks. And it had to be teenagers, she thought, as she trudged up the stairs, coffee in hand. Who else would climb to the roof of a hero agency just to knock on the door? If it was anyone normal, they would knock on the front door at a much more reasonable hour. She threw open the door, already mentally preparing the rant she would give to the hooligans who had dared to disrupt her this early in the morning, but stopped short when she saw a scared little girl who couldn't be more than 5, with blood smeared all over her. Bubble Girl dropped her coffee. Izuku smiled as he watched one of Night Eye's sidekicks usher Eri inside. The heroes would undoubtedly set up a perimeter to try and track him down, but he should be able to avoid that if he left right now. He headed back to his base to shower and get dressed for school, sending a text to his mom telling her that he'd gone for an early morning run. Chapter 24. Eri-chan. Is this her? Tsukashi looked through the glass at the girl that Night Eye had brought in, who he'd said was named Eri. The officers had already taken samples of the blood covering her, but they hadn't had time to clean her off yet, so most of it was already dried to a dirty brown and was starting to flake. Recovery Girl was on her way to take a look at her, since they didn't know if Eri would be safe in hospital because of her ties to the Yakuza. As soon as Eri mentioned that Overhaul and all of his men were killed by Mastermind, Night Eye sent his sidekicks and a whole team of police officers to investigate the base, only to find a bloodbath. There hadn't been a single person left alive, with the exception of Eri, and Overhaul himself had obviously been tortured to death. Mastermind's signature M carved into his body over 100 times. The police were still in the process of taking pictures of the scene before they could remove the bodies, and they had already set up a perimeter to keep out the media, who had flocked to the compound as if they smelled the blood. Tsukashi sighed and walked into the interrogation room, Night Eye and Nezu right behind him. He hated that they had to interrogate this little girl who had obviously been through too much in the last 24 hours, but anything they could find on Mastermind put them one step closer to discovering his identity, which was essential to resolving the high-stakes hostage situation he had set up. "Hello, Eri," he spoke softly, sitting down across from her and pulling his files for both Mastermind and Overhaul down on the table. "My name is Detective Tsukashi, this is Nezu, and you already know Sir Night Eye. Is it all right if we ask you a few questions about how you ended up on Night Eye's roof this morning?" Eri nodded, her wide eyes scanning the room in clear display of hypervigilance. Seriously, Tsukashi knew that Mastermind was depraved, but traumatizing a child, that was a new low. "Who left you on the roof, Eri?" he asked. He said his name was Mastermind?" "True. What did he look like?" "He was short, and, he had pretty green eyes. He smiled a lot too, I think. He had a mask covering his mouth, but, his eyes were smiling." "True." Tsukashi looked at Nezu and Night Eye, who returned his glance and nodded. It matched what they knew of him, so it probably really was Mastermind. But why would a villain, especially one as powerful as Mastermind, drop a little girl off at a hero agency when he could have just kept her for himself or sold her off? "Do you know why Mastermind kidnapped you?" Night Eye asked with a frown. Eri looked confused. He didn't kidnap me. Mastermind-sama saved me." "True." Night Eye's eyes widened, and Tsukashi knew that he looked much the same. Nezu seemed to be the one who maintained the most composure in light of this new revelation. "What did he save you from?" Overhaul. He was a bad man. He told me I was sick, and that's why he hurt me." "True." Eri was starting to tremble, and Tsukashi realized she was more terrified of Overhaul than she was of Mastermind. The child was obviously traumatized, but the question now was, who was responsible for that? Nezu hummed. "Do you know why he saved you?" Eri nodded. "Mastermind-sama, he said that he wasn't trying to save me. He already killed all the, bad men by the time he found me." "True." "Did he tell you why he killed Overhaul and his men?" Night Eye asked. Eri frowned. I think, he said..." Eri's frown deepened as she tried to remember. "Mastermind-sama said that Overhaul had, threatened someone close to him. I think he killed them so he couldn't hurt them anymore." "True." Tsukashi rapidly scribbled that down in Mastermind's file. Maybe they could find people Overhaul had threatened, and it could lead them to Mastermind's identity. It was a thin lead, since Overhaul had undoubtedly threatened a lot of people as a Yakuza boss, but it was more than they'd had in months. Did Mastermind tell you anything else? Maybe why he decided to leave you with Sir Night-Eye? Eri fisted her hands in her dirty nightgown and bit her lip. He said he was like me, she whispered. True. What do you mean? Nezu asked patiently. Eri stayed silent for a long moment, and Tsukashi was starting to worry that they'd pushed her too far, when she began speaking again. Mastermind-sama said that people hurt him too. He said that, strong people get hurt sometimes, and he said, that I was strong too, just like him. True. She looked back up at them. Was he telling the truth? Do strong people get hurt sometimes too? Nezu took her hand and smiled. Yes, even strong people sometimes get hurt by others. It wasn't your fault that Overhaul hurt you, and it doesn't mean you're weak. If people were weak simply because others chose to hurt them, I wouldn't have ever been able to become a hero, because they hurt me too. Eri's eyes brightened and there was a knock at the door. Is everything all right, dearies? Recovery Girl poked her head through the door. I'm here to take a look at that little girl. Tsukashi nodded. I believe that we've asked all the questions we had about Mastermind. He turned to face Eri. Although we'll probably have to ask you more about Overhaul and his operation, but that can wait for another day. All right then, everyone out, Recovery Girl said sternly, as Eri started to shake and she rapped Tsukashi on the head with her cane. I need to check on the patient, and you're going to make her claustrophobic. Out! They quickly complied, leaving Recovery Girl to comfort Eri and examine any injuries she might have. As soon as they were outside, they stopped to look at each other. Mastermind was most likely a victim of abuse as a child, Nezu said. If not at the hands of his parents, then likely at the hands of teachers or peers. This abuse might explain why he goes after heroes, since it was likely that he wished heroes would save him, but they never did. Tsukashi nodded. I'll run a checklist of domestic violence survivors with green eyes. At least that'll give us a start, since it's most likely the violence happened in the home, and we can expand the search if that doesn't turn up any leads. Make sure to cross-reference that list with anyone with connections to the Yakuza, Night-Eye said. Mastermind only got involved with this because Overhaul threatened someone, which means he does have people he cares about. Whether they know his identity is still up in the air. Nezu clapped his hands together. Perfect! I do believe we are closer to catching this monster now than ever before. Tsukashi tried to rub the budding headache out of his forehead. This case was terrible. Nothing for months, and then their best leads come from an unlucky little girl. He needed a break. Hey Nezu, how's your search for Todoroki coming? Nezu frowned and shook his head. Not well. The League has practically disappeared since we took down All for One, and there are no leads to any of the members. I hate thinking that one of my best students is being held captive for this long. He shivered slightly. But the alternative is worse. At this point, we are having to confront the possibility that Todoroki may be dead. With Shigaraki's disintegration quirk to dispose of the body, we would never even know. Tsukashi sighed. Do you have any leads on why he was taken? Has Endeavor received any ransom demands? Nezu shook his head. We still think that is most likely why he was taken, but perhaps they are waiting for things to calm down a bit before they enact a second part in their plan. He sighed. Endeavor isn't helping the investigation either. He simply blames us for letting his son get kidnapped and then not being able to find him. He doesn't seem to care that we have 0 leads, and he puts everyone on edge, always hanging around and saying hateful things whenever he is at UA. Having a student kidnapped is a nightmare scenario, and something I hope to never have to deal with when I became principal, but it's even worse that the victim is so high profile. How are the other students dealing with it? Night-Eye asked. Not very well, Nezu frowned. We have every member of Class 1A meeting with Hound Dog weekly, but they still feel Todoroki's absence sharply. I believe they have started mourning him. The last time I checked, they had set up a small memorial on his desk. They change the flowers every few days. Other than that, they have been adjusting well to the dorm system, and there haven't been any major incidents, so it's going about as well as we can hope for. It'll take time, Night-Eye said sadly. Hopefully we will find him soon. If what we just learned leads us to Mastermind, perhaps he'll be able to lead us to the League. Tsukashi nodded absently. He couldn't let himself get his hopes up that they would find All Might's killer, not when Mastermind was so slippery. Who knows? Todoroki had a strong quirk, so maybe he would able to escape and find his way back to them. But Eri's words echoed in his head as he said goodbye to Nightai and Nezu and sat down to do paperwork on the Overhaul massacre. Even strong people get hurt sometimes. Hey there, guys, gals, and non-binary pals. It's Eleanor, and I hope you're having a lovely day today. I'm having a lovely day today because what the fuck, 2,000 subscribers! I lost my mind. This is crazy. So yeah, that's why this is such a long video. I basically spent like the last couple of days just like whenever I could recording another chapter of Mastermind, and was like, yeah, as soon as I hit 2,000, I'm just gonna blow them all at once because fun. Well, someone commented to let me know that I hit 2,000, and I was like, oh, shit. So I went recording another chapter, and now I'm recording this to be like, thank you. This is crazy. I'm so happy. I know it's so like cliche to be like, I never thought this would happen, but I didn't. I really wasn't planning to really do anything with YouTube. I was like, this will be a fun little thing that I do occasionally. Maybe I'll make like one video a month and we'll probably like hyperfixate on it for 3 months and like make like 10 videos and then get bored and like stop. But here we are, 2,000 subscribers later, and I still love it. I'm still obsessed. This is still like the thing that I enjoy doing most. It's still my go-to hobby. So thank you all so much for supporting that and saying how much you like it and appreciating the thing that I do, because I do really enjoy it. And like, would I still do it if you weren't listening? Probably. But I probably wouldn't do it as often because I wouldn't have the lovely little encouraging messages from you guys that like make me feel like I'm not like an idiot, like, and then everybody hates this. So thanks. It's a nice knowing that I'm talking to people, and I've made so many like amazing friends like through doing this, and it just makes me really happy. So I like want to actually do something for 2,000 that's not just like, here, have like an hour's worth of Mastermind, but I'm kind of stuck on what to do. I debated doing like another Q&A because, you know, it's been a while and there is a lot more of you now. So, but I don't know, maybe y'all don't really care and you don't really have any questions for me as a person, which is fair. Someone in the Discord suggested that I do like a subscriber showcase where you guys can send me like art and pictures you've drawn or taken or videos that you've made or things that you write, and I'll read them and put them all in one video and just shout you out, which I think could be really fun. Let me know if you think that's fun. It'll take some organising, but I think that would be really cool. Let me know if you think that would be cool. Or if you have any other ideas for what I could do, because I kind of don't know. But besides all that fun stuff, let's talk about Mastermind, because these chapters, ooh, we're really popping off. So much has happened. I'm used to just like hopping in and being like, oh my goodness, this chapter at the end of every chapter, but there's been a lot. And I've been recording it for days. So like, I'm like, oh, there's so much content in my brain right now. Tell me what you thought though in the comments below, because I love talking to you guys about what's going on in the fic, staying up to date, be like, oh, what's going to happen next. I know a lot of you haven't read this fic before and like are going through it as I'm going through it, which is fun. Obviously I've read the whole thing, so I know what's going to happen, and like whenever you're like, oh, I wonder what's going to happen with Shoto, I'm like, yeah, I wonder what's going to happen with Shoto. But I love it, so please go ahead and leave comments. You can also like the video, you know, if you liked it, and to boost my serotonin levels. It does, it makes me very happy, so please do it. You could also subscribe to be notified whenever I make new videos. 2,000 of you. How? Who are you? What are you doing in these streets? Know that I love you. You're amazing. And you are worthy of praise. You deserve to be acknowledged. You deserve to feel validated. And know that I will do that for you. Because until I see you again, you better be practicing some self-care. I want you to be going to bed on time. I want you to be eating your 5 a day, get that fruit and veg in. I want you to be brushing your teeth twice a day, people. And make sure you're drinking some water. Get some hydration in you, you little pruny little cuties. I don't know what to say there. You are a beautiful bed of flowers and you must be watered, okay? Or you'll die. Do you want to wither? Don't think so. Yes, that was a threat. I will catch you guys laters.